On December 16, 1983, someone walked onto a stage at a small London club and handed Tina Turner a silver disc in front of 2,000 people. 250,000 copies sold. She was 44 years old. 7 years earlier, a hotel manager in Dallas had asked if she needed help. This was the answer. But the story of how that silver disc came to exist begins not on a stage and not in a recording studio. It begins on a Tuesday afternoon on Portobello Road in London in 1982, outside the offices of Virgin Records. A man named Martyn Ware was standing on the pavement feeling sorry for himself. Martyn was one half of Heaven 17, a British synth-pop group that had found real success in the early 1980s. He was in the middle of a project called Songs of Quality and Distinction, a covers album on which he and his bandmates acted as a production team, bringing in guest singers to record classic songs with a modern electronic sound. The project was going well, except for one problem. The singer he had wanted for a specific track had fallen through. James Brown had said no. Martyn stood on Portobello Road trying to think of who else could do what James Brown could do. Ken Berry, the financial controller of Virgin Records, happened to walk past at that exact moment. He stopped and asked what was wrong. Martyn explained. Ken Berry said, "I'm going out to Los Angeles on Sunday. What do you think about Tina Turner? She's a mate of mine." Martyn Ware said yes before the sentence was finished. What nobody knew, standing on that pavement on Portobello Road in 1982, was that a chance conversation between two people outside a record company office was about to restart one of the greatest careers in music history. Tina Turner said yes. She came to EMI Studios in London to record a version of Ball of Confusion, the old Temptations song. She arrived with her manager, Roger Davies. She walked into the studio and looked around. She asked where the band was. Martyn Ware pointed at the Fairlight, a digital music computer that in 1982 was still a radical and unfamiliar piece of technology to most musicians. Tina Turner and Roger Davies stood with their mouths open. She had spent her entire career recording with live bands. Real drums, real bass, real guitars, real voices surrounding her in a room. Now she was looking at a machine that was supposed to replace all of that. She did not walk out. She stepped up to the microphone, and she sang. Ball of Confusion did not become a massive global hit. It charted in Norway, which is not nothing, but it is not what anyone had hoped for. But something important had happened in that studio. Martyn Ware had heard something. Not just a good voice. There were plenty of good voices. He had heard a voice that could do something almost no voice could do. It could make a synthesizer sound human. It could take the cold precision of an electronic production and fill it with something warm and urgent and completely alive. He did not forget that. In 1983, when Capitol Records signed Tina Turner and asked Heaven 17 to contribute to her first solo album, Martyn Ware knew immediately what he wanted to do. Not write something new, cover something that already existed. Something that would show the world exactly who Tina Turner was as a singer. He came up with a list of songs. At the top of that list was Let's Stay Together by Al Green. He explained his thinking to Tina. The way he put it was this: she needed to embed herself into the public perception as one of the great soul singers of all time. Not a rock singer, not a pop singer, not the woman who used to perform with Ike Turner. One of the great soul singers of all time. Let's Stay Together was the song that could do that, if she sang it right. Tina Turner said yes immediately. She came back to the studio. She stood at the microphone. The track began playing through her headphones. Martyn's electronic production, precise and modern. Nothing like the warm live band that Al Green had recorded with in 1971. And Tina Turner sang it. One take. That was all it took. One complete, uninterrupted, fully realized performance. The producers sat in silence for a full 10 seconds after the tape stopped. Nobody spoke. Nobody knew what to say. Martyn Ware would later describe what he heard in that single take as the sound of a singer who had already lived with the song for years, who had already decided what every note meant and every phrase carried, and was simply delivering what she had already worked out alone, somewhere before she arrived at the studio. He said she had nailed her interpretation of the song before she even came in. The first take was the only take. Let's Stay Together was released in November 1983. It entered the UK charts immediately. It climbed to number 6 by Christmas. It sold 250,000 copies. It became the best-selling 12-inch single in America in 1984. But before any of those numbers existed, there was a television performance. Channel 4 in the United Kingdom had a music show called The Tube. It was broadcast live every Friday evening, and it was the place where careers were made and broken in real time in front of millions of viewers. Tina Turner was booked to perform Let's Stay Together on The Tube in November 1983, alongside Martyn Ware and Glenn Gregory of Heaven 17. Glenn Gregory, the singer of Heaven 17, said publicly that he never got nervous before going on stage. He had performed hundreds of times. He was a professional. But standing in the wings at the Tube, waiting to go on with Tina Turner, his hands were shaking. He watched her in the dressing room before the performance. She was in what he described as a cavewoman outfit. A short dress, a big wild wig, her 2 backup dancers already moving around her. She came to Martyn Ware half an hour before the live broadcast and told him that when they reached the middle 8 of the song, she was going to have her dancers run their hands up and down his and Glenn's legs. Martyn's response was immediate and alarmed. He said, "I don't think that's a good idea. We don't want any embarrassment on live television, do we?" They were terrified. Then the broadcast began. And what Tina Turner did on that stage in front of a live television audience of millions was not what terrified young synth-pop musicians had been prepared for. She sang. She moved. She commanded every inch of that studio with the complete and total authority of someone who had been performing for 30 years and had never once wasted a moment on stage. Glenn Gregory stood next to her and felt, he said later, completely invisible. He said it with no resentment, only with the specific awe of someone who has just understood the distance between very good and extraordinary. The performance went to air. The phones at the record label started ringing. And on December 16, 1983, 3 weeks after that television performance, Tina Turner walked onto the stage at the Venue in London. The Venue was not a stadium. It was not an arena. It held 2,000 people, and it was in the Victorian neighborhood of London, and on any other night, it was the kind of place where careers were in the process of becoming something, not the place where they arrived. But on December 16, 1983, it was sold out. Every seat, every standing position, every available inch of floor was occupied by someone who had come to see what the noise was about. She performed for nearly 2 hours. She was 44 years old. She had 2 backup dancers with her who were, by the estimation of the photographer who documented that night, probably half her age. The photographer's name was David Corio. He had been pressed so close to the stage by the crowd that his camera was jammed against his face, and he could not have put it down even if he had wanted to. He spent nearly 2 hours trying to keep up with a 44-year-old woman who was out dancing her backup dancers in front of 2,000 people who had paid to see something they weren't entirely sure would happen. It happened. Near the end of the set, someone from Capitol Records walked onto the stage. They were carrying a silver disc. A silver disc in the United Kingdom means 250,000 copies sold. They handed it to Tina Turner in front of those 2,000 people. She held it. She looked at it. She had been told, by people in offices with gold records on their walls, that she was finished, that she was too old, that whatever she had once been, that time was over and the world had moved on without her. She was holding the evidence that they were wrong. 250,000 people had bought a record made by a 44-year-old woman who had walked into a recording studio, looked at a computer she had never seen before, and sung a song perfectly on the first take. After the concert, the word spread quickly through the music industry in London. There was a senior executive at the label who had still not been entirely convinced. He had seen the numbers. He had seen the Tube performance. But numbers and television were one thing. A room was something else. Someone told him about the December 16th concert at the venue. They told him about the 2 hours and the backup dancers, and the crowd pressed so tight the photographer couldn't move, and the silver disc, and what Tina Turner looked like when she held it. They told him he needed to go and see her himself. He went to the December 20th concert, 4 days later, also at the venue. He left before the encore was finished, walked directly to a telephone, and called his colleague. He said, "Sign her for everything we can." The label extended their commitment. The full album sessions began in January 1984. Mark Knopfler of Dire Straits gave her a song he had written and decided didn't suit his own band. The song was called Private Dancer. Terry Britton and Graham Lyle had written a song that had already been rejected by Cliff Richard and Donna Summer. The song was called What's Love Got to Do with It? Private Dancer was released in June 1984. What's Love Got to Do with It reached #1 in the United States. It won 4 Grammy Awards. Tina Turner was 44 years old when she recorded Let's Stay Together on the first take in a London studio. She was 45 when the album came out. She was 48 when she stood in front of 180,000 people in Rio de Janeiro. All of it. Every Grammy, every stadium, every record traces back to a Tuesday afternoon on Portobello Road in 1982, when a man named Martyn Ware was standing outside a record company office feeling sorry for himself, and a man named Ken Berry happened to walk past and mention a name. And it traces back to a first take, one uninterrupted, fully realized, perfectly delivered performance recorded in a London studio by a woman who, 7 years before that microphone, had stood in a hotel lobby in Dallas with 36 cents and a face full of blood, and had been asked by a stranger if she needed help. She had needed help. She had accepted it. And in a recording studio in London in 1983, she answered the question that the Dallas hotel lobby had made possible. She answered it in one take, and she never looked back.